Buongiorno a tutti e benvenuti a questo nuovo webinar organizzato dal Dipartimento di Scienze della Terra, ma con tanti partner che sono il CIRSEC, il Centro per Studio sugli Effetti dei Cambiamenti Climatici. Ringrazio Giacomo Lorenzini, il Presidente qui presente, e ringrazio il corso di Scienze Ambientali del Dipartimento dell'Università di Pisa, ringrazio la Triennale dell'Università di Pisa per avere organizzato questo nuovo webinar, ma in particolare voglio ringraziare AIQA, l'Associazione Italiana per lo Studio del Quaternario, che ha dato il suo patrocinio e che tra l'altro oggi lascerò l'onore e l'onere di presentare il nostro relatore Willy Timmer. Lascio però poi la parola a Cesare Ravazzi. Quindi non presenterò io questo seminario, ma volevo dare giusto due indicazioni tecniche. Il seminario sarà in inglese. Pregherei a tutti di staccare la telecamera eccettuato le persone che parlano, e il microfono, lasciare banda. E alla fine dell'intervento sarà possibile fare domande. C'è nella tools di Teams è possibile cliccare sulla manina e quindi chiedere la parola, oppure è anche possibile, noi siamo in connessione anche YouTube, fare domande che eventualmente ci saranno riportate dal nostro supporto tecnico del SID Bernardo Carmina, che ancora una volta ringrazio per il supporto infinito che ci stanno dando, non soltanto in occasione del webinar ma anche in altre occasioni, ma credo che anche Willy sia molto contento di aver avuto questo supporto in questi ultimi giorni. Non voglio andare oltre, passo la parola a Cesare Ravazzi, che è in rappresentanza dell'Associazione Italiana per lo Studio del Quaternario, e lascio a lui la parola della presentazione del seminario e magari ci dice giusto due parole anche sul perché di questa iniziativa è stata inserita nel percorso per arrivare a Roma 2023. Grazie e per ora vi auguro buon ascolto. Nel caso si colleghino stranieri, soprattutto la parte di domande, magari possiamo farla in inglese. Ok, perfetto.
Buongiorno a tutti. Quindi, come diceva Giovanni Zanchetta, ho il piacere di presentarvi il seminario dell'amico Willy Timmer nel quadro della roadmap del convegno che si terrà nel 2023 a Roma. Come tutti sappiamo, Willy è professore di paleoecologia all'Università di Berna. Direi che è uno dei maggiori paleoecologi mondiali, non solo europei. Direi che è la persona più esperta sui temi che vengono proposti nel seminario di oggi, in quanto da oltre un ventennio si occupa non solo dell'ambiente alpino, ma anche dell'evoluzione della dinamica vegetazionale in contesto mediterraneo, poi dal punto di vista dell'impatto delle variazioni climatiche e ovviamente anche delle culture che si sono succedute e in diversi contesti insulari e peninsulari anche della nostra Italia. Poi di recente è diventato titolare del progetto Explo, cioè una grande iniziativa europea che consentirà di porre maggiore attenzione proprio anche in termini di risoluzione cronologica alla problematica dell'introduzione dell'agricoltura, soprattutto provenendo da sud e da sud-est. Queste culture agricole del Neolitico sono ben rappresentate negli ambienti umidi dell'area mediterranea, ed è proprio qui che abbiamo gli archivi naturali di maggiore importanza e di maggiore risoluzione, di cui ci parlerà Willy. Grazie e prego.
Grazie mille Cesare per l'introduzione e grazie a Gianni per l'invito. E ora andiamo alla presentazione e cambio in inglese. Proviamo se funziona. Si vede? No, ok, aspettate, riprovo.
Ecco, comincia a succedere qualcosa, perfetto.
Comincia, premo il tasto giusto, spero.
Sì, sei in modalità presentazione oggi. Ecco, perfetto.
Però sono sul lucido sbagliato. Aspettate che... Ok, così?
No, non ti vediamo, almeno io non ti vedo ancora.
Ok, torno. Seconda volta.
Ecco, sta succedendo qualcosa, sì.
Occhio.
Ecco, ci siamo, direi che ci siamo.
Ci siamo.
Ci siamo.
Ecco. Mi scuso per il contrattempo.
È il bello della diretta.
Welcome everybody. I will start with that, and I hope you can hear me quite well. With these slides, the title Vegetation Responses to Warm Mediterranean Mid-Holocene Summers, which is a little bit provocative, and we will see why later on. So the tools that we use are coming from Paleoecology. Like last time we had this brief introduction, I changed the slide to focus here on chironomids and pollen. You see on the top here the chironomids that we use here through a transfer function as a proxy for mean July temperature in degrees Celsius. So that is possible to quantify through the assemblages. And then we look at the response actually that the pollen is doing to this chironomid inferred temperatures as a proxy for vegetation, which this is a pollen of beech, and we see here the leaves of beech as a symbol. And all of that is contained in the Natural Archive, which is storing all this information through the centuries and through the millennia in a very stratified way, so that we can exploit this information and put it in a chronological order, which allows us to look at dynamics, at the response dynamics through the decades and through the centuries, and sometimes even the millennia. So here in this study that we conducted a while ago, and now we actually did some new studies, and I will come to that later. We caught two lakes in the Tuscan-Emilian Apennines, which are Gemini Inferiore and Lago Verdarolo. And they are located here in the center of the map, close to Pisa, you may see here. And this correlation analysis is just to show where the climate is very similar. So if it's above 0.9, the correlation coefficient, you see it's representative about the climate that we reconstruct through the fossils of the chironomids, for instance, in this case, for Corsica and what is north of Corsica very well, and then expands to a bigger portion of Europe with decreasing correlation coefficients. And this is just based on today's climatology back perhaps 100, 150 years of measurements. So it's something that is related to the present. This is a picture of one of the sites, which is quite emblematic, I think, with this beech forest, Fagus sylvatica, just everywhere. There is hardly any other tree around standing in the catchments of these trees today. So it's very fascinating. And to be honest, they also look quite young. So maybe like 50 or 70 years old. They are not big trunks around. It's all just regrowth or new growth. So this is from Gemini Inferiore, but Verdarolo looks very similar. And you see the position of these lakes in Italy. So you see also the coring platform here for those that are not experienced. So we drilled from this point here and then moved more to the center of the lake, then back in 2008. What we exploited from these lake records are chironomid assemblages. So it looks like a pollen diagram. It is kind of related to a pollen diagram, but it shows this insect fauna through time, and you see on the left the depth H model, which is quite good, I think, with these dates all in line, and this allows to build up a chronology. And you see the alpine, subalpine taxa that are in blue here, how they change. So they are more in the past, and that is late glacial. Then in the Holocene, they decline, and the warm-loving taxa would be in red. The blue ones are the cold-loving. The warm-loving would be in red, and they expand through the Holocene. So that would all be qualitative, but actually what is possible is then through a regression to build up through a transfer function these estimates of mean July air temperatures. And you see that's now the reconstruction coming from the late glacial 14,000 years ago with the younger Dryas here, the Berling-Alleröd interstadial, the warming up, and the Holocene thermal maximum here around that time, and then a temperature decline according to this reconstruction at this site. You see the altitude, it's a mid-altitude 14,000 or so, 1400 or something like that, 1,400 meters. So now I'm stuck. I try to go down, but it doesn't move. Now it moves. Good. So on these slides, there is a comparison with the second side, Gemini, and you may see just from the assemblages that is an independent, fully independent chronology with different dates. You may see that the pattern is repeated, and also the reconstruction of the temperature looks very similar to that of Verdaloro. So we can infer very similar dynamics. Perhaps the late Holocene cooling here is a little bit less pronounced than at the first side, Verdaloro at Gemini. But altogether, we were very happy to see that we can reproduce the data. So because this is a requirement, of course, because somebody may come and say this is an anomaly, something that you cannot reproduce in time and space, but here we are very confident because of this very good match. And now we can compare these, so they are together now here. On the left, you see the chronology in calibrated years. So we have again 14,000 years to 0. And we see, according to these two sides, they are not now overlaying here with the Holocene thermal maximum HTM here. And we can compare with other proxies like sea surface temperature from the Mediterranean, just here. And the match is amazing, I would say. It's very, very good. So that we are confident that actually these curves, as we have shown in one of the first slides, are representative for Mediterranean climates. And for the Mediterranean, also a simulation here, just using global climate models, dynamic models, that shows that also the models today are able to reproduce this pattern for the Mediterranean. And some of the variation that you see in the models is, of course, driven by this summer insolation curve, which comes from astronomy. These are orbital parameters of the Earth around the Sun, which vary with a certain cyclicity. And we see here summer insolation in red, and in blue is the winter insolation, the December insolation. And just to make it very sure, on the very right, there is also the glacier evidence from Italy, Calderone, which shows that there was a period around the HTM, perhaps a little bit earlier in the early Holocene, where there was no glacier at all there. There were glaciers before, and of course, then apparently, according to the dates, they re-emerged during the late Holocene, apparently in response to this cooling. So the cooling was that pronounced that it allowed the reappearance of glaciers at Calderone, according to this record. So altogether, this looks all convincing. And the models are very nice because, of course, one may say this is just a simulation, but they are also suited to look at certain details of the climate that we cannot access at moment with our proxies. And as far as they suggest through these simulations, we can see If we go back in time, so these are the quadrants here for Switzerland, or then central Italy, moving down to southern Italy, you see different quadrants. And in these quadrants, there is a kind of a climate diagram simulated just for the months in regard to temperature and precipitation. And what we see, the temperatures are these curves, the orange and the green one. If you compare pre-industrial with 6,000 years ago, it appears that continentality, according to the models, was more pronounced. In the north, perhaps in this quadrant here of northern Italy and western Switzerland, more than in the south, because the two curves are closer. But one can also look at precipitation. This would be here the squares, and look how this was different, like during the Holocene thermal maximum and today. And actually there is some seasonality difference, so in regard to moisture. So the summers then, at least in the south, appear to have been a little bit drier, or nevertheless somehow drier. Here this difference here is quite pronounced. In the south more than in the north. So we also see some latitudinal gradients that change in regard to moisture and in regard to temperature. So altogether, 6,000 years ago, not just warmer, the summer were warmer, but the winters were cooler. And there is a moisture difference with drier summers in the south and perhaps wetter winters. This is also according to the simulations. We can support that by looking at the very famous lake level records of Michel Magny, and here is famous is the one from Acesa from Tuscany, which actually implies this reconstruction, which matches very well with the Jura reconstruction from France. This Italian reconstruction implies that from the Holocene thermal maximum to today, moisture was increasing at least at this side. So what kind of moisture? We don't know, but the proxy is supposed to indicate summer moisture. So it would be summer moisture, and this would be then in agreement with what we have seen from the models, that the summer moisture was decreased during the HTM. So it was a drier, relatively drier, not much drier than today then. So now we can go to the pollen record, which of course for a botanist like I am is the most fascinating part of this. And we see on top here again the chironomids, the temperature curve, which goes through the millennia, 14,000 years here down. And we see some of the details of the pollen diagram, like here the human indicators, the crops and the weeds, the cereals, but also cannabis and then plantain, and also some fruit trees like Olea, Castagna and Juglans. And together they show that at latest 2,000 years ago, but actually if we look in detail, at least 5,000 years ago to 6,000 years ago, human impact increased. And here is also a fire record through charcoal, and you see it's also peaking in the past here 1,000 years, but there is some variability before, but certainly here towards the present is a huge increase in fire. And to sum up, there will be many more details and more will follow later. To sum up, here is just two curves, PCA, ordination axis 1, the most important one. And this was a little bit a surprise because usually it shows the tree cover, but in this case at Verdaloro, it doesn't show the tree cover. So most variation in the data is summarized here, and it looks a little bit like the human impact. While the second axis here is then what I said before, so mirroring more or less the tree cover, which you see here in red. This is arboreal pollen and is supposed to be a proxy for forest cover. So the axis 2, which is the minor axis, mirrors then the forest cover. So the hypothesis that axis 1, which is the more important one, would reflect human impact can be explored with the sample, with the species course here. And if we look at the species course in the ordination, we see that on axis 1 in this direction, actually one extreme is controlled by this group here, which is prominent, and this group here. And if we look inside, it's Cerealia, Plantagolanceolata, Olea, Juglans, Cannabis, Castagna, and all the things that we know they are associated to human impact, while on the other end, there is Tilia corylus, Ulmus, Fraxinus excelsior, and Pinus sylvestris. So this looks like on axis 1 really a gradient from human species on one side, on the left, to then more natural species. So we will confirm that. While on axis 2, we see the forest going from Abies dominance here up to open land, Poaceae, Artemisia, Apiaceae. So this would confirm on axis 2 that the second most important, explaining about maybe 26%, it's given there, together 60% is actually due to forest cover. And because it's forest cover, it's also probably climate, which is controlling, at least in the first part during the late glacial and the Holocene, the forest evolution. So now here we append just below some other things that are interesting, not just arboreal, non-arboreal, and the culture indicators, but also the steppic elements. Here very nice, the late glacial steppes through Artemisia and Chenopodiaceae. Together we have more Artemisia, so shows that they were probably more moist steppes and not very dry steppes. Then we have the mixed oak forest that establishes already during the late glacial, the Berling-Alleröd interstadium, but then expands very nicely at the onset of the Holocene to come up and make a peak in the Holocene thermal maximum and then to decline in the late Holocene. You see this very nice decline. And together with the mixed oak forest, there is also Abies alba. We know that from the macrofossils because we have also analyzed it's the species. We know Abies alba is going up, and here the Abies pollen curve, and then declines, but very much in difference to the mixed oak forest, which is still abundant here, then declines at the very end. You see that Abies suffers local extinction during the past 2,000 years. So these species that was so prominent, up to 40% and more, collapses totally, completely here during the late glacial. And we see that this decline of the mixed oak forest, but also of Abies, is connected somehow to expansion of Fagus sylvatica, also with macrofossils here that we analyzed, found at the site, which is very marked. So it goes up also to 40%. So it's really a kind of a shift, a complete shift in the vegetation composition. And this is fascinating because this is a long-standing question in Italian paleoecology from the Apennines. What caused actually this big change in ecosystems? Was it human impact? We see it here. Was it climate? Was it this cooling? Or what was it? Was it moisture? So that's an open question. And for that, the first thing that we did is redundancy analysis. So we looked at some variables, like here the mean temperature anomaly coming from the chironomids, or the microscopic charcoal influx, how much they can explain of the variation and with what kind of species they are correlated. So we see here that warming is correlated with this group here, Tilia corylus, Fraxinus elder, Abies, Ulmus, and Acer, while it is negatively correlated with this taxa here, a little bit surprising because Austria and Fraxinus ornus are sub-Mediterranean taxa, so they should be warm-loving. But there is a negative correlation on this axis. Maybe we find them out, what's going on. And we see this positive correlation with microscopic charcoal of the anthropogenic group. That's very nice, like Cerealia, Olea, Cannabis, Castagna, Juglans, and Plantagolans. So this indicates, as we know from the last lecture, that most of these excessive fires, so the high fires, were correlated to human impact, probably just used by people to open the forests and to do agriculture. So together they explain these two variables, almost 1/3 of the variation. Almost 1/3 of the variation. This is a lot in the pollen data set. So then to go to more details, to look more at the kind of the response dynamics, we made these response curves that I also introduced last time in the last seminar here in Pisa, which show actually, which show actually the response here of some of the taxa that are important, of some of the trees or shrubs here that are important in the diagram to fire. As a proxy, we have here microscopic charcoal influx, so it's directly related to that. And these response curves show that most species decline very drastically, like Abies, but also Ulmus, Antilia, and Fraxinus excelsior in response to fire, to increasing fire. But one species especially benefits, and this is Fagus sylvatica. And what we also see is if fire then increases to become really very high, then Corylus reappears and starts to re-increase, which is a detail, but nevertheless interesting because Corylus is a very strong resprouter. So what could be behind this response of beech to fire, this positive response of beech to fire? We know today, thanks to new studies, that beech is quite fire advantage. It's a masting cedar, so it benefits a lot from canopy opening through fire here in this case, and reduction of competition by ground vegetation. If then fire gets too strong, also beech, of course, is reduced. So this was the response to this variable, which is fire. And now we go to the one which is actually related to the title of this talk, is the response to climate and especially to temperature here. Temperature as derived from chironomids, and this was an ecological surprise to us. We expected some linkages, but we didn't know what actually will happen. And you see here the mean temperature anomaly. So 0 is the temperature of the past 2,000 years about. So it's the late Holocene, 2,000 years ago. And this is deviation colder than this or warmer than this, up to 2.5 degrees warmer during the Holocene thermal maximum. And what you see, what is very surprising, is Abies that benefits a lot from warmer condition while Fagus is declining. So why is this surprising? Because ecologists know, of course, from the textbook that Fagus and Abies should share very similar ecologies. So they are like almost like twins considered in the textbook. So they should be like mesophilous and cool-loving. So this was a big surprise. And what we see also is this, we expected this increase of the more thermophilous broadleaf deciduous taxa like Tilia, Fraxinus, or Corylus that benefited of these warming conditions at more or less at these altitudes during the Holocene. So looking at that, one would think Abies is not at all like a species that belongs just to these mountain ecosystems, but also has a warm-loving edge. And this brings us back to the talk we had last time in the seminar, which showed that Abies was also occurring far down in the Meso-Mediterranean coast vegetation of Tuscany. So this brings it together, perhaps. So why is this response then so strong, going up to 40%? Of course, Abies alba was very dominant during the Holocene thermal maximum. This explains why there is such a drastic response. So now this would be ecology with the ecological surprise that I wanted to present. But if we now go to other things the pollen is used for, so these were kind of ecological analysis, response dynamics, how the ecosystems are behaving in response to disturbance or climate warming. The pollen records can also be used, and this was a question last time of Gianni, to reconstruct climate. And if this is done at the Mediterranean level, this curve here appears. And this is then very enigmatic. If you look at these curves, it says actually that during the Holocene thermal maximum, we had a thermal minimum according to the pollen, which is in contrast to all the other evidence that we have from the glaciers, from the sea surface temperatures, but also from the chironomids, and also from other proxies that we don't show here. So the pollen reconstructed temperatures are really amazing and puzzling. So we need to explain this pattern, this contrasting pattern. And this cannot be done with these overview studies because they don't show the original data which are behind. But if one goes to detailed studies like this one from Lago della Cesa in Tuscany, published in 2011, the authors here very kindly provide the data on which these reconstructions are based on. And what we see here is this cooling here during the Holocene thermal maximum. So these are July temperatures, high before, then during the HTM they decline, and then they recover here at about 3,000 years ago. And if we look at what causes this decline, it's our species, is Abies alba mostly. You see when it goes up, these curves, some of these curves, they have these wiggles that match very well. And the decline, of course, of Quercus ilex. So the inference is we have here at this side -2 to 5 degrees Celsius. July temperature, mean temperature dropped from 22.5, which is good for this location as a reconstruction because it's comparable to the 2 days temperature, to very cool temperatures that are more representative of Central Europe than of Southern Europe during the Holocene thermal maximum, which is really amazing. The authors were also so kind to provide other estimates. So here we see the temperature reconstruction on the right compared to the summer precipitation reconstruction. And one sees that they are very nicely negatively correlated at some points. And when we have this Holocene thermal cooling, we have a moisture increase. So now it's really puzzling. We see another factor that is popping up. It's not just temperatures that are changes, but is also an increase of precipitation, apparently connected with the HTM. So now I will try to bring up a hypothetical explanatory model for what we see, just to discuss in the seminar if this is feasible or not, what the pollen actually could show. So we have here the vegetation of today, how it is more or less in the Mediterranean with, of course, vegetation that has been opened in the lowlands and the forests that are on the slope here. And these are temperate forests normally. So the mountain forests that are dominated today by broadleaf deciduous. And maybe on top there is some conifers left, but also this part here has been opened so that we have subalpine meadows and not much conifers are left in the Mediterranean. And the forests are growing about at 600 to 1,600 meters, so that means at these temperatures about. So if now the forest would go up, this would mean we could infer like for 300 meters, if they go up, a warming of 2 degrees Celsius. Of course, because they would move up and they would bring this temperature to these altitudes in the reconstruction. But if they would move down, they would bring cooling down. And if they would move down 600 meters, the cooling would be 4 degrees Celsius, which would mean hypothetically in the lowlands, it would move from 23 degrees Celsius to about 20 to 15 degrees Celsius here just. So this is now all hypothetical, but actually we can compare that with the mid-Holocene thermal maximum situation of vegetation. How was it? And this is how it was. We had the forest down. So it could well be that this kind of reduced forest vegetation in the lowlands today by farming causes a false cooler than 2-day temperature, just because the forests are down, and today the forests prefer like this mid-altitudes elevation and are not down in all the records, because these are sums like we have seen, also including the lowland vegetation like at Lago della Chiesa. So we would have a false cooler than 2-day temperature signal in the reconstructions. And the complicated thing now is that not only temperature can, or land use can cause this, because this lower limit of forest sometimes in the Mediterranean, especially if we go south, maybe to reach the Sicilian coast, is also limited by moisture, not just land use. So actually, if we get more moist conditions, then also the forest expands down, crosses this lower tree line limit, and goes to the lowlands to reach the coast. And this could also mimic a kind of a cooling during the Holocene thermal maximum. So we would have both. So the question is here, was the Holocene thermal maximum moist? Because this would explain a lot. And was it the winter or was it the summer? As we have seen, there is seasonality in. And to be solved, I think here we must then have other proxies like the oxygen isotopes that would add some additional information. So I think this is still an open question, very fascinating open question to be solved by future generations of projects, if this is true or not. So this is worldwide, that moisture is limiting lowland forests today in dry areas. So to check this hypothesis, we then compared with some reconstructions that are not just coming from the Mediterranean, and this is from all of the northern hemisphere. There is also some southern hemisphere. And what appears here for the HTM is really amazing. So that's 6,000 years ago, like we were discussing before. It's really amazing because we see there is the HTM in the pollen, but usually when you go to dry areas, like here in inner Central Asia or the Mediterranean, or here in the semi-deserts of Northern America, like Nevada, so you see it's getting cooler. So we have apparently here related to dry environments, we have a cooling signal, which is not just restricted to the Mediterranean during the Holocene thermal maximum, but also expands to other areas of the world which are dry. So then, of course, one thinks, is this really true? Because all the other proxies indicate that these areas should have been warm. So it could be that at the global level or the northern hemispherical level, this cooling, this apparent cooling, pollen-inferred apparent cooling, is just caused by moisture and human impact. And to explore that, we just looked at the Mediterranean, how the temperatures, here you see the mean temperature anomaly is correlated to precipitation data at these sites. And what is really striking is that there are some empty climatic kind of areas here and here. What is that? So basically, we have no positive temperature anomalies in the driest areas. This is impossible to reach, but we know today that also dry areas like the desert of the Sahara can be hot. So this is not a good reason. Or also we have an empty vacant part here. And there is in any case a very strong correlation in these reconstructions between the temperature anomaly and the precipitation. And this needs to be explored. So, and with that, I come to the conclusions. My conclusion would be that plants are not just thermometers. It's a complex relationship. They also show moisture, and not just moisture, they also show seasonality. They show maybe also disturbance like fire and frost. So all these needs to be really considered. And ecology and the species biology, the physiology that we look at should really be considered. We also heard that the land use legacies, that they matter. We have seen this example with the fire and the land use that it affected really forest growth and opening, and perhaps that even the reconstructions of climate if we just base on pollen. I would not say pollen is not a good proxy. Pollen is probably the best proxy we have. It's an excellent paleoproxy. But the drivers of the vegetation changes are important. So we really need to go to the details and think about what is causing the pattern. It's not just that we can transfer any signal into a temperature kind of reconstructions. And for this, very important is interdisciplinarity, multi-proxy perspective. So we need to take care of all the evidence and put that together so that we get a whole picture and we can recognize if something is really kind of exceptional or something doesn't match the whole picture, like we have seen now with this cool kind of conditions, if we infer the climate just from the pollen and don't consider all the other proxies, being it chironomids or being it sea surface temperatures or the glacier evidence or the oxygen isotopes evidence, or even the modeling studies, which the modeling studies are very nice because they allow us to do experiments kind of in the past. And at the same time, they also disentangle the different factors and they are a mirror of what we know today. So they summarize all the physical knowledge and the biological knowledge that we have today. So they are very, very important to know where we should also make some progress in the future. And I close with this very nice, huge, giant Abies alba, a survivor, I would say. And you see, it's a classic situation for the Italian peninsula. This is from Ticino, the northern edge, of course, of the Italian peninsula. But you still see it's a survivor all around just beach. And they look like chopsticks in comparison to this giant. They are maybe 100 years old, 50 to 100 years old. And this is a size of a man just standing next to Abies alba, how impressive this tree can be. I thank you for your attention.
Grazie, thank you very much, Willy, grazie. Veramente molto interessante. I will try to say something in English, just in case there is some on YouTube who is following us from outside. And I think there are many interesting questions, but I also think the first who have the right to ask a question is Cesare, probably, if Cesare wants to ask anyone, have any questions. But then please, are there any questions? Carlo Baroni ha alzato la mano, ha la facoltà di parlare.
Thank you, Willy, for your very interesting contribute. I have a curiosity more than a question. How long is and how detailed is the information coming from the late glacial time for reconstructing chironomics temperature reconstructed in the northern Apennines?
Yes, thank you very much for the for this question. It's not very long back, so the conditions were not good of these chironomids for the late glacial. So they start to be good at the end of the late glacial. What we have done then is just we looked at the pop plain catchment where they are better, just assuming that whole northern Italy, including Ticino, is kind of behaving similarly today in regard to climatic conditions. And so through that approach, we were able to expand this to about 33,000 years. So that means to the LGM and beyond, especially.
I understand about the northern Italy, it's okay. My question is related to the northern Apennines.
Oh, okay. To the northern Apennines, no, it stops there. It stops with what I showed. At the moment, we don't have things that go beyond, to my knowledge, at least. But one must say they are. We made these comparisons for those pieces that go together with northern Italy in time, and they also represent northern Italy. So we are confident that this could be extrapolated just by looking at northern Italy. But you are right. Okay. In regard to the Apennines, no, this is work that needs to be done. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Carlo. Thank you. So is another question from Giacomo Lorenzini. Please, Giacomo. And I remember you, Giacomo, is the president of the CIRSEC, Centro for the Climatic Change Impact, study of the climatic change impact. Please, Giacomo.
Thank you. In addition to congratulations to Willy, just a little question. I am a plant pathologist, and so I study plant diseases. And the question is, are paleoecologists sure to be able to recognize the possible effects of plant disease in population dynamics of their trees?
Yeah, that's a very, very important question and very difficult to answer. At the moment, we have little evidence, but there is, like spores of fungi that could be found, or then also insect remains, pathogen insect remains, like bark beetles, but this is very rarely the case, I must admit. What we hope for, what we really hope for, is that ancient DNA will provide environmental DNA through the course we are developing right this in paleoecology, that it will provide much more information about pathogens of plants, that we can track that through the ancient DNA of the pathogens themselves. Because we are very good at plants that produce pollen or fungi that produce spores or other things, but we are not good at all in regard to the pathogens, is my personal opinion at the moment.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Tirate giù la manina chi ha già chiesto di parlare, perché sennò poi io faccio confusione. Are there any other questions? I have just one. It's no, I have a couple, but the first is a curiosity. So the Fagus and Abies, you know, I am geologist. So, and the story of Fagus and Abies in Ververola, which show two different patterns for one from the fire and the other from temperature, basically. So my question is, and then you say, well, they must have the same ecology according to the traditional books and so on. But this signal can be not an ecological signal behavior of the plants, but actually a really different response to the fire, just this, and not to the temperature. Maybe temperature have an important effect in the sense higher temperature might help fires or not. That's the point, but this is, yes, probably doesn't work in this case. But okay, so it's, yeah, they can be reconciled in some way. And the second point, which of course it will be a point I will discuss with you in more detail, is actually you reconstruct temperature over the Apennine, and the stable isotopes in some speleothems resemble quite a lot this trend in summer temperature. And the paradox is that usually we believe that oxygen isotopes in speleothems, I mean cave concretion, are mostly related to the winter signal and not the summer, which should be the opposite. But the point is, it will be interesting try to compare different proxy to look if we can find a very rough empirical equation which can be solved temperature from one side and rainfall from the other, but just to look if putting together they can help to disentangle in some way this point using proxy from different environment to become quantitative in the other proxy. I don't know if it can be possible.
Yeah, so to the second part of the question, I fully agree. And this was also my reason to come to Pisa to discuss with you this kind of things that are puzzling me. This seasonality and this. We also see contradictions, like you said, between the winter proxies and the summer proxies, the lake levels and the oxygen isotope, and this needs really to be solved. And to the first question in regard to Fagus and others, you are completely right, but we know from the fire where it happens. And at the beginning, I said it's just more or less the huge fires are during the past 1,000 years, 2,000 years, while the temperature influence is over the whole arch. So these 15 or 10% each that we know from earlier, from the redundancy analysis, that this kind of factor explains the vegetation, the main vegetation change, which is of course also this Fagus expansion. I think is coming from both, but for the temperature is more in regard to the whole Holocene, while the fires is more towards the late Holocene. But both are important. You are completely right, yeah. And we see a connected effect, that's also true, because the late Holocene decline of this taxa could also be related to fires in part, because they are fire sensitive. So Abies are about, of course, Tilia, Fraxinus, but we know from the charcoal record that it goes up just during the past 1,000 years. So we assume it was not that important before, but we don't know, actually, yeah.
Are there any other questions? In case I have a comment about Accesa, but I don't know if, okay, Cesare, yes, of course, please, Cesare.
If no other questions, I would add my viewpoint on on the ongoing discussion. That is, plants reflect many ecological factors. So it is not only fire, it is not only temperature, it is all together. So the challenge is to be able to distinguish. And not only that, but we have also the question that what we really see in our records is a history. So this factor may act in different intensity in different times. So when Willy, you provide a single redundancy analysis for the whole Holocene, I would not agree that this will provide a clear picture of the reality, because you have to distinguish different. You must distinguish different windows of time, and your variance should be reflecting different factors with different intensity in different time spans. So in that respect, the question of habeas and fagus is also a matter of time in which humans have provided different intensity or impact. So you may have both responses to humans and to temperature. It's not the case to stop the question with one evidence. One evidence will not stop another evidence in another time span. So that's my general comments to this. So, but of course I have to compliment with Willy, because these cryonomics records are providing a lot of information more, and about the discrepancy between cryonomics and pollen, I would say you have used a limited number of pollen reconstructions that are coming from only from one school. I want not to mention this school, but there is a problem with the analogs they use. So they have no analogs for habeas. So it is impossible for them to reconstruct the ecological and the climatic response of habeas if they don't have any calibration data set in the Mediterranean, and especially in the mountains in the Mediterranean. So it is very easy to get wrong with a wrong data set that is being used in a wrong climatic context, I would say. So, but now we have new data, and probably there will be also the possibility to expand this European, Euro-Asian modern pollen database to the Mediterranean region. I hope so, because there is a lack of information about this.
Should I comment on that, or?
I think it's a comment. Is a comment. I mean,
thank you, Cesare. Thank you, Cesare. I just want to say you are right in regard to these are just the centennial patterns. So I don't claim about like disturbance ecology or things that are happening at the decadal scale or so. These were just the trends, the Holocene trends, and for that I think it's a good analysis. And the second one, I think you are right, but to bring justice to these people that you didn't mention, I also don't want to mention who did this. You're completely right, diplomatically. In the study of Bern, they analyzed 3 different techniques and all more or less brought up this picture. So I think it's a problem related to pollen, but I'm very optimistic that we could overcome that, and we did that actually in Sicily, very warm, very dry environments, and we there used, and we presented that also, actually PDS, probability density functions of Norbercule, and with those things it worked. So we didn't have this cooling anymore. So pollen was then again a good proxy for temperatures too. But it's a different probabilistic approach, very different approach, yeah. So it's not hopeless. I didn't want to say that.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Cesare, okay. Are there any questions? Elena Mori, please, Elena, have you a questions? Yes, please.
Yes, I have only one question, and the question is this: it is not possible to see pathogens in the past plants. How we can see this connection today?
So you mean that if we don't see it, so what is usually done to do these things is that we need to calibrate. So we start always from today, like Cesare said, we observe what's going on in the landscape, look at the pathogens, and then look at how these pathogens are reflected in the sediments. And this we call a calibration study. And then from the knowledge how these pathogens affect the plants today, we can build up hypotheses that we can check with the proxies. That's how we work in paleoecology. And basically what is lacking today is this calibration. So the pathogens are not really calibrated. It has been done for pollen. We looked at how the pollen reflects the vegetation, or the chironomids, how they reflect the temperatures in the water and in the air, but it has not been done, to my knowledge, for the pathogens. And with this lack, with this linkage between the today's pathogens and the fossil imprint, basically it's impossible to work, and that's where we are standing right now. But you are right, okay. We should start from the present, and we always start from the present.
Thank you.
Just if you have still some few minutes for questions, but just one comment about Acesa. And one point is in Acesa, there is a longer standing issue about the reconstruction of lake level in Acesa compared to the other proxies. And so recently we made stable isotopes on the same core studied by Boris Vanier and Michel Magny. And I'm not saying one can solve the other, but stable isotopes are extremely stable during the Holocene, except during the Younger Dryas. And this suggests how it probably is. The lake have a very huge plumbing system, which is related to one of the main karst system in the Tuscany, which is a karst system which is very saline. So my impression, the lake level changes might represent something which need to be understood very well, because it's not clear if there is a very strong summer signal, or there is something who comes from this very big aquifer, which probably does not respond quickly. So I think there is something open question about the reconstruction of seasonality from the lake changes in Acesa. So there is still some open questions about this. So I don't know.
Right. I fully agree. We did that in Sicily. We looked at Michel Magnier's proxies, and together with the oxygen isotopes too, Gorgo Basso and Lago Preola in Sicily. And there we could see exactly that there is some things that you need to reconcile. It's not that straightforward. Like, is precipitation of these carbonatic proxies that are used to reconstruct the lake levels, is this really just showing the summer lake levels, or is it showing the general water supply, wherever it comes from? It could even be from the sea sometimes, like in coastal environments. So we just
in Preola and so on, yes, it's probably
yeah, exactly. So at the end we came up with a suggestion, but I think a lot needs to be done. Yeah.
So I suspect in Acesa the signal, especially in the early Holocene, is actually not the summer signal, but it's an increase of precipitation during the winter. So, and because the karst is very large and continues to supply water to the system, which is not, and then there is the story, it might be different from usually we believe it is. But anyway, it's nice for who knows in the future. Sorry for this very specialist discussion, but so are there any other questions? In case I think I want to ask to Bernardo how many people connected in YouTube, just to know, and just curiosity, and
just 1 minute.
And you know, we are very happy to have a higher number on YouTube and on Teams.
50.
50. Well, we go. Yes, another good number of people. So, just to remember, thank you very much again, Willy, and of course, we hope to have him again in Pisa, maybe, but it's very difficult, you know, in this period. But anyway, we can contact by telematic. But also, I remember you that the activity of our department on seminars is webinar is very high. So almost every Tuesday there is a seminar. Not next Tuesday, but anyway. So please, who is interested in continues to follow this kind of webinar, just to check in our main homepage, and you can check which is the webinar of the Tuesday. So, and grazie a tutti per aver partecipato. Ringrazio tantissimo Willy, ringrazio anche Cesare per la sua presentazione e per il suo intervento. Ringrazio tutti, diciamo, pardon, sento delle voci di sottofondo, forse sono io. Ringrazio tutti per il supporto. E soprattutto ringrazio ancora una volta il supporto di Bernardo Carmina e del SID per gli aspetti tecnici e la riuscita di questa iniziativa. Al prossimo webinar, per chi c'è, spero ancora una volta supportato da Inqua se necessario, o altri webinar. Grazie.
Grazie Willy, ciao.
Grazie, arrivederci, ciao. Grazie.
Ciao.